welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Good. Our guest for this episode is Dr. Jason Padden, who is an organizational leader, consultant, author, thought leader, instructor, and workshop facilitator in the fields of global leadership and global diversity, equity, and inclusion. For the past 7 years, he's been the director of the Robertson Center for Intercultural Leadership at UC Berkeley's International House. In this episode, Dr. Jason Padden discusses recognizing power dynamics in the workplace, emphasizing the leader's awareness of their power and privilege. He advises seeking feedback actively, using strategies like anonymous surveys and 360-degree feedback. And he also highlights acknowledging behavior impact and empowering employees to succeed in addressing that feedback. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Let's get right into those power dynamics, because I see that a lot of leaders I talk to have that issue. They don't realize the dynamics when they get into a leadership position. And how do you think power dynamics in the workplace can be identified, though, and addressed effectively? Because there's many different interpretations. Many leaders I found just ignore it and just feel like it's not an issue. It's not something that they need to be worried about.
The thing about power is it's hard to see when we're the ones who have it. All power dynamics are always there in every human interaction and in every human relationship, but we don't tend to talk about it very much. It's most visible when we lack it. And that's why in the book, I really put the onus on the people who have more power to bring self-awareness to the power that we have. So it's hard to do because I'll tell a really quick story to illustrate this. About a decade ago, I was in the middle of a running race. I was running a half marathon, and I was feeling so good. I was moving so fast, and I'm like, this is great. I'm going to set a PR, a personal record today. And then the half marathon reached a turnaround point. And as soon as I turned around, this headwind just knocks me in the face. I'm like, oh my God, what just happened here? And I'm like, I was moving so great because I had this tailwind at my back. And now that it's a headwind and I can feel it working against me, it's a whole other ball game. So it's a metaphor, but I think it applies to how power works in the real world. When power helps things to go well for us, it makes life easier when we have power. When things go well for us, we tend not to notice the forces that are helping things go well for us. We tend to attribute it to our own greatness or our own cleverness or our own good decisions or our own character or whatever that is. When power is in our faces, used against us, it's a whole other ball game. And so one of the things that can happen, and there's studies that show this, I talk about this in the intro to the book, there's a lot of studies out there about what happened to us when we acquire power. And one of the things that happens is we tend to forget that we have it. We become less empathetic. We tend to interrupt other people more. There's all kinds of things that we do when we have power that are a result of the power, which is one of the big challenges that we have in recognizing and acknowledging the power that we have. So one of the things that I like to emphasize when talking to folks about this is, if this is uncomfortable or new, that's not a problem. Nobody should feel like they're supposed to have all this stuff figured out, because the way that society's systems and structures are set up, and the human brain is wired to just exercise power without us even being aware that we have it.
That's very true. And I've even found, and I don't know if that's the case with you, but people that didn't have power that come into power, they forget pretty quickly what it was like not having that power. So it really doesn't help to kind of have them think about a time when they didn't have it, because it's really hard for them to put themselves back in that spot. And they're not very empathetic as a result of that. So with that being said, is there other ways, other techniques that you can provide our listeners with, once you've acquired that power, what is maybe one or two things that they could do so that they can kind of relate better to the times when they didn't have that power and relate to other people to act more empathetically and more inclusively to their employees?
Well, one thing that I think people can do, and I guess it's I don't know what generalizations I would be prepared to make about folks reflecting back on a time when they didn't have power and how clear those memories are going to be. So as a practice, yeah, I don't know how reliable that would be. I think what we need as leaders and also as people. So I also want to make a distinction here. When I talk about power, I'm talking not only about organizational authority, I'm talking about privilege too. So societal privilege, unearned advantages as well. So it isn't just, when I say leaders, we tend to think about people with organizational authority, but there's also this other dimension of privilege, which is also everywhere and in every interaction as well. And also in many ways, even more challenging to identify and reckon with than organizational authority. So that's just terminology. I just want to get the terminology straight there before I say anything more about this.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. But feedback is crucial to this. We have to find ways of getting honest feedback, and that can be really hard to do. So how can leaders in positions of power ensure that they receive honest and constructive feedback, especially because people might have a hesitancy to do that? So being able to get good feedback is important. And there's challenges in actually getting that feedback. One of those challenges is that to give feedback is to claim power. It's an unstated assumption that the people who are giving the feedback are the people who have more power. So if I'm in a position of less power and if I go to say to my boss, it's like, hey, boss, I got a little bit of feedback for you. Even by saying that, I'm claiming power that my boss might not consider to be legitimately mine. I'm inverting a power structure, and that's a no-no. And I can get myself in hot water doing that. So as leaders, if we want honest feedback, we have to be very deliberate and intentional and action focused over time. We don't want to do things like say, give me your feedback, because chances are, especially if it's a new relationship, whoever I'm saying that to isn't going to trust that I'm going to handle that feedback with care. Another don't is don't give what I call tit for tat feedback. I've been a recipient of that. It was actually my boss's boss said he invited me into a conversation and said, I'm actually want your feedback about XYZ. And it wasn't all positive feedback. And then he turned around and gave me some negative feedback. And it just felt so petty, and also had me feel very unsafe because this person had so much more power than I did. So all of that is like, okay, so that's like complications, makes it really hard, all that difficult stuff. But we do have tools at our disposal. So different kinds of anonymous surveys are a best practice for getting honest feedback. Organizational climate surveys can provide feedback at the organizational level. 360 surveys can provide feedback on an individual level. It's not a cure-all. Just doing a 360 needs to be in the context of some organizational initiative, some leadership development initiative. And there's also ways that you want to protect the people who are providing the feedback so that they can't be identified. One way that that's done is you have a minimum number of raters. Like, I think the magic number is somewhere around 5, where people can't have, like, if I'm giving my boss negative feedback in a 360, I want to be sure my boss isn't going to be able to identify me. So it's nice to be protected by having a bunch of people who are providing feedback as well.
Well, I like your model that you give regarding that. Just that's a nice acronym, SADIE, SADIE. And the first step of that framework is the S. And the first step is to be aware that of the different styles of feedback. Not everyone likes their feedback, like what you were saying, the same way. And it's worth carving out time, right, during one-on-one meetings to discuss how they prefer to receive it to begin with.
Yeah, having that meta conversation around how we prefer to receive and to give feedback is super duper important, because it could be that maybe I don't have a problem with the feedback, like the actual content, but I have a problem with the way it's being delivered. So if we can just clear that out of the air, we're going to increase our chances of success pretty substantially.
And then the second letter A is it acknowledge, like what you were saying, those power dynamics, right? That there's probably going to be a power imbalance and then feedback can feel somewhat threatening. And you need to reassure them, right, that there's room for improvement and make it a safe environment.
Yes. And one thing that I want to emphasize around that is I don't think it's fair or reasonable for leaders to expect that in relatively new, if I'm new to my position or if I'm new to a relationship with somebody who has less power than me, I don't think it's reasonable for me to expect that they're going to give me that much honest and negative feedback. What generates the trust over time, what builds the trust over time, is action. And also so doing certain things, that is like implementing the feedback, and also not retaliating, because that's what people are afraid of. So if I can show over time that the feedback that you share with me is something that I'm actually listening to and implementing, that's important. And there's another piece of this that doesn't often get discussed. And that is, I believe that there's value in also saying what feedback I'm not going to be implementing. So you gave me XYZ feedback. Thank you. And here's what I'm going to do, and here's what I'm not going to do, and why. And what that does is it signals, because if I just ignore it, then maybe they think I haven't heard them. So what I'm saying is, I've heard you. I understand why you gave me this feedback. And for these reasons, I'm either unable to or unwilling to implement this feedback. That's another important piece of building trust when it comes to giving and receiving feedback.
Well, that's a great tip because I don't hear that very often. And that takes courage on the individual's part to say that, because some people feel like I'm not going to use the feedback. I'm just not going to tell them, though, of why I'm not using it. I'm just going to ignore it and then hopefully everything will be okay. But you're right. It feels to the person giving that feedback that you're really not listening to them. And maybe they're not going to give you feedback in the future because you didn't act upon it and they don't know why you didn't, right?
Exactly.
And I hear this a lot too with feedback from senior leaders, right? We talk about feedback on the employee and the person that has more power than them, but I hear this a lot from senior leaders that it's hard to get honest feedback. So I love that piece of advice you gave about over time you have to prove through your actions and form a trusting relationship if a senior leader really wants to get honest feedback from their subordinates.
Yes.
So let's move on to the next letter, and that's going to be the I. So it's noting the impact of the behavior you're looking at. So we tend to judge ourselves based on our intentions, which is common to everyone, I think, but everyone else based on their actions. So, and therefore, feedback is easily greeted with, but I didn't mean to. And what one leader told me one time is, Charles, you don't get credit for your intentions, you get credit for your actions. So keep that in mind.
I like that phrasing. Yeah, that's what you get credit for. Exactly. It's like whoever I'm working with, having the feedback conversation around, couldn't care less what's going. Like, I mean, yeah, okay. There's room for intent there. It's not that it doesn't matter at all, but what's like front and center, first and foremost, and a lot more challenging to deal with is the impact. And then all of any disconnect between intention and impact is really for me to deal with internally, or maybe with a friend or a peer that I have relatively equal power with. Say, this was really, I got this feedback. It was really hard for me, and I just need to vent about this, but not in the relationship with the person who has less power. You can end up doing damage if you're just like the other, but I didn't mean to.
Right. And the final part of it, E, is empower the employee to succeed in addressing what you're asking them to address, offer solutions, provide accountability, but more importantly, be a supportive partner, not a disciplinarian.
Yes. And that's in the context if I'm the one who's giving the feedback. The way that our system is set up is scarcity is front and center. There's never enough time. There's never enough money. There's too much to do. And none of us is good enough to do the job. That's just the way the structures are set up. And so we have to be extremely intentional about working against that. Let's ground things. Let's acknowledge and name the strengths of the people that we're giving feedback to, and let those be the foundation for the conversation. The human context. Nobody is perfect. We all have things that we need to improve. And the empower piece is an important part of it. Is I'm not just going to dump this on your lap and say, you need to go do this. As let's just say it's a supervisor-supervisee relationship, one of my jobs in helping the people under my care to succeed is to set them up for success. So if there are specific things that I can do to support them in implementing the feedback that I'm giving them, then that's going to help them to succeed. And that's theoretically, in a way, that's what it's all about. These conversations so often devolve into just sort of contests about who's right. And that's not what we want. If we're sincere that what we're there to do is achieve organizational goals, we're doing it together. We each have a different role to play. And one of my jobs is to do what I can to help the people under my care to succeed.
When on the opposite side too, with receiving feedback, I've heard a lot of different responses from individuals when they receive feedback, but in some cases, the best response that they can give you is just thank you. I'll think about it. Instead of getting defensive, let it process, let some time pass before you decide what you're going to act on, what you're not going to act on, and let them know that. And just let it go at that so that they realize it's not something that you're really going to counter against right away.
Yeah, and that's an extremely important strategy for emotion management, which is another big context piece around this is because feedback is inherently threatening because the power dynamics are so thick. It's understandable and expected that our threat detection mechanism in the brain, the amygdala, is going to get active when we are receiving feedback. Just like any time where the amygdala is active, we might just need to take a break. And the most important thing to do in that moment is to not do. Whether like I've had to teach myself because I tend to run a little bit hot. Anybody who knows me will tell you this. And I've had to learn to just shut up, like not speak. Because if I speak in that moment, I am going to do damage. So I can actually take a big step forward in the relationship if I just close my mouth, take a deep breath, maybe go for a walk. Sometimes we just have to interrupt so that we don't go down the road of actually doing damage. So yeah, sometimes it's just thank you. I'm not sure what to do with that right now. Can we pick this up at a later time?
Well, and feedback is almost never easy, but this SADie model for giving feedback can minimize those common pitfalls, build stronger, more trusting relationships, and really turn feedback into what it can be used at as a tool for learning and growing, which is really what it's designed to do. Love now to go into kind of that amygdala hijack and that neocortex and how that interacts in workplace settings. Because, like what you just mentioned, once that amygdala kicks in and almost hijacks your emotions, it's really hard to calm down and have the right level of emotional regulation in high stress situations or times of conflict. So, give a little more detail and elaborate on how that can interact in workplace settings.
I think one of the things that uh, would we'd all benefit from thinking about keeping front of mind more often is that the workplace itself is inherently threatening to us. Now, why is that? Because survival matters more than anything else. How do we survive? We have to provide resources for ourselves and for our nearest and dearest. Well, how do we do that? Well, in these days, we go to the grocery store, we procure our food, we pay rent to a landlord, or we pay the bank our mortgage, whatever that is. But it's all embedded in this monetary system, and we receive the resources called money in exchange for our labor. And so it's extremely important that we are able to continue to make a living. So this is a modern day like jungle or savanna where we're duking it out for survival. And so if we're in the office every day, the worst outcome that's lurking in the back of our minds is going to be losing our job, losing our access to the means for survival for ourselves and for our family. So of course threat is going to be lurking in the back. We're going to be looking for threats. The amygdala, its job is to protect us, to alert us to threats in the environment. It's always looking for threats. It's going to find threats. And two ways that tends to show up in the workplace is so two cues the amygdala is looking for. One is power, and then the other is difference. I don't want to say the other. Those are two big ones: power and difference. So different kinds of behaviors, different ways that people look, and that's just the reality. And the amygdala has a lot of tricks up its sleeve, and one of those tricks is it sends inhibitory signals to the neocortex. The neocortex, when we're in a state of relative calm and we're able to use the neocortex, that's where we do our executive. That's where our executive function lies. That's where we do a lot of our collaborating, some of our empathizing as well. The higher functions are there. So when we feel under threat and the amygdala is active, we can't think straight. We cannot do our best work. And so, first and foremost, we've really got to educate ourselves on the behaviors that other people engage in that bother us. That's, I say, first and foremost, one of the most important things that we can do so that we know when our amygdala is likely to get triggered. And then there's a whole other world to explore around that. But that's one thing. But even before that is we need to have at the ready a set of emotion management strategies to recognize when the amygdala, to recognize that we're in. And Daniel Goleman, who coined the term emotional intelligence, also has this term amygdala hijack, to know when we're in an amygdala hijack. I remember once I had a conversation, or I received an email from my boss, and I was so freaked out by it. And I called my friend to rant at him about what my boss had said in his email. And my friend, who understood, a very emotionally intelligent person himself, said, "Jason, you're in a massive reaction right now." I didn't want to hear that. I mean, it helped me over time, but what I wanted to hear is I wanted him to say, "You're right." Because that's another thing the amygdala does, is it convinces us that we're right. And I'm not interested in those moments in any kind of like distance from it. I just want you to acknowledge that I'm right. So all of that to say, uh, and especially, and some people just run cooler. I don't know what that's like. I'm really curious. To be in someone else's brain would be really interesting. Um, something that I have a kind of a difficult time with. I tend to run hot, and it's when I have a reaction, I have to be extremely intentional about modulating it, and getting myself to a place where I can actually activate my neocortex. So it's just I think an important part of it to recognize that it's the animal part of human nature that's really at play here, and we need to leverage all of the human aspects of our brain to the best of our ability to tamp that down in those moments of threat.
If you like this episode, then please share it on social media and consider leaving a review or rating. If there are specific leadership topics or industry leaders you'd like us to feature on the podcast, we are welcome to your suggestions. Remember, knowledge's transformative power is only activated when it is acted upon. So what actions are you going to take on the insights and knowledge shared in this episode?